Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mobility Mission podcast from Cadence, episode 6. And I have with me today Matthew Bryce from Modified by MS. Hi, Matthew. How are you?
I'm great, Johannes. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we met, we were just reminiscing about when we met about a year ago and talking through your story and how you came about founding Modified by MS. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself when you got diagnosed with MS and what that was for you so we can
Sure.
tell our community about it?
Be happy to. So I was 36 years old. This was 2004. And I started having some unique symptoms that I was like, this is kind of strange. And just some other unique symptoms. Things like I couldn't put my arm on my desk at work and without it feeling like it was on a block of ice. And, I was stumbling a little bit. And I was a pretty avid bike rider with my girls and things like that. Enjoyed that. And most certainly wasn't an athlete, but enjoyed being a dad and enjoying those types of things. But I remember sharing with my wife, I'm like, you know what, there's some things going on. I'm not sure what's going on. And they were just kind of, if you will, adding and, piling up. And so we said, well, let's get to the doctor. I went to a primary care physician that I'd gone to before in our family. And he said to me, you know what, it kind of sounds like MS. I'm like, what's MS?
Wow. So he knew about it and was like these symptoms stack up to that?
Right. So exactly. So I was just, sharing the variety of different symptoms. And, he said, I don't want to scare you, but it sounds like MS. And I didn't know what that was. And so we had a further conversation and he said, we need to set you up with a neurologist and get some MRIs for confirmation of the stuff, if it is or whatever. He said, what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to go home over the weekend and start going to Google. And what do you think the first thing I did?
Of course you did.
Right, of course it did. And I was like, oh my goodness, I was looking at all these and I'm like, I have this, I have this, I have this. And it was starting to really sink in. And so I was already kind of like, okay. And I'd never really heard of multiple sclerosis before. And again, this was, 21 years ago almost. And so when I did the whole back process of the MRIs, and the MRIs were provided to the neurologist, and he came in and he said, it's not every day tell a 36-year-old he has MS, but you have MS.
Man, won the lottery.
Yeah, right. And I said, okay. And I'm looking at my watch the entire time, honestly, because I'm like, I have a meeting that I have to attend and take care of in the next hour and a half. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be late. How long is this going to be? And he said, well, I need to go to my office. And he came back to my office with a box of injections. And he said, you're going to need to take one of these injections every day for the rest of your life. And my heart dropped. And I looked over at my wife and I could see that she was melting.
Yeah,
And
of course.
and I was,
Is that still state of the art that people like probably depending on the practitioner, right? But are people still, this is your diagnosis, take some injections and off you pop?
You know what? I would like to believe, based on what we're going to get into further conversation, that the medical community is better about landing that position with people. Because, again, this was 2 decades ago, and he wasn't an MS specialist, come to find out,
Yeah.
which is fine. And so probably the bedside manner aspect of it could have been a lot better. And, so I would like to believe that it's much better. I have conversations with several doctors that have become partners with us and friends, and they're very genteel, I should say, speaking to their patients and very compassionate. So, but on the other hand, I've heard that type of scenario given to other patients who have MS, a very similar story. And they'll say, you have MS, or you're going to need to do this, and things like that. So that's where it was in my position on that particular November day in 2004. Yeah.
So what did you do after that?
And again, like I said earlier, I just was like, okay, I've got to get to a meeting I'm supposed to be conducting, and I left in my car and went back to the hotel, and my wife got in her car and she went back home. And it really, to be very transparent, it wasn't until over the last several years that my wife and I started talking a little bit about what was she going through, what was she interpreting, what was she feeling. I know I was thinking, all right, I got to go back to my hotel. I got to run a meeting and things like that. And but I processed it a little bit. I think I was processing it before when I did my Google search that I wasn't supposed to do. And my wife obviously, and then I remember coming home that evening, and we talked a little bit about it. Our girls were young, so it really wasn't a big thing. I didn't have many outward symptoms, and I kept my diagnosis very close to the chest, to myself, my wife, a couple immediate family, my mother who was living at that time, and some immediate family. But that was pretty much it. I didn't let my work know at that time, because again, I just, it was I don't know, what does this mean? What does this look like? It most certainly wasn't like today. And again, this was before Facebook, social media, Instagram, barely YouTube. So there wasn't a lot of information out there in the social channels like there are today. And people can just, at their thumbs, just go to a phone and look at things.
Yeah. Oh, so interesting. So how did you manage the first few years? Because you ended up doing a stem cell treatment, which we'll get into in a moment. But
Right.
so what were the first few months and years after diagnosis for you?
So the first several years were pretty much no issues. It was non-issues. The only thing that really became an issue was my first year of diagnosis, and I was doing the injections every day, at the same time every morning before I went to work, and those were fun. And
Yeah, I can only imagine. I hate needles.
yeah, I do too. And you never get to love them, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, no.
But it was literally almost a year to the date when I was diagnosed. So a year fast forward in 2005, I was off work that day, or I was going in late, and my wife had came home, and she, I was feeling a little warm, but I wasn't really thinking too much of it. And she said, honey, have you seen yourself? What's going on with your face? I'm like, what do you mean, what's going on with my face? And she said, you need to look at yourself. And I looked at the mirror, and I had hives and swelling all over my face. And at that point, literally my throat was starting to feel like it was swelling up. And she says, we need to get you to the ER right away. So at that point, we immediately went to the ER, and I was actually going into anaphylactic shock. And unfortunately, that was an unfortunate side effect of the medication that I was going on, or that I was on. And so that was my really only issue. Continue living through the MS and, the disease. It really became a non-issue. I was still doing life.
Part of life.
It was exactly. I was still doing life. I have four beautiful daughters, and they were very active. Between middle school, high school, grade school, very active. It wasn't until probably about 2011 that, due to work stress and an unbelievable amount of work stress going on, I started using a cane in my mobility and things like that.
Wow. Okay. What did your workplace think about that? Did you tell them at that point?
It was. So it was about a few weeks, before that, I had actually said to my wife, and I'm like, I feel like I need to start using some sort of cane, because I was limping a little bit more. I was dragging my foot quite a bit. My left side of my body is more of the weakness area, and I was dragging my foot quite a bit, especially if I was on my feet a lot, which in that particular capacity.
Yeah.
Right. It was constantly on my feet, constantly checking on groups and events and things that are going on. And the more I was on my feet, the more tired I was getting and such like that. And so it was that point where I had a conversation with my employer. And because I also had to do what's called a manager on duty once a month. And I said to them, I just don't feel comfortable being a manager on duty and having, if there's a situation of a safety of a person or family and things like that, if I need need to get to them quickly. I knew I wouldn't be able to do that quickly. So I requested, and that's when I shared with them that about what was going on with my disease and, and my diagnosis and things like that. And they were a little surprised.
They were surprised. Were they supportive?
Well, initially, I think they were supportive, and that's kind of a whole nother ball of wax, if you will. Initially, they were. They said, "Okay, we're going to we'll accommodate that. We'll take you off that schedule," and that was fine. But that was really the only accommodation that I ever requested and ever really needed. I still continued full time. I still parked, half a block away and walked into the hotel. I was still using the cane, walking around the hotel and things like that. And but so that was really the only difference that had taken place. And externally, I think they were fine with it. Looking back, I probably have some other thoughts.
Well, different times, right?
Right.
And different
Right.
environments.
Exactly.
Was that around the time when you started exploring stem cell treatment? And what did prompt you to go search for alternatives and treatments and that kind of stuff?
Sure. So in those early years, again, there was only a few different medications that were, if you will, online. And every several weeks or every couple months, I should say, I would get into this really deep dive of research, and whether it's online, and again, some of this Facebook was still new and so on and so forth. But I would subscribe to different medical periodical journals and have them sent to me. I was constantly digging and learning. And it was that point where I came across stem cell transplant, HSCT, and I did everything I could to learn about it. I probably took 5 or 6 months to learn what the process was, what was involved, et cetera, et cetera. And at that point, applied for the clinical trials that were taking place up at Northwestern University in Chicago. And I received actually an email that said that I was declined. And then I was like, okay, then, we'll figure out a different way or something else.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of other places internationally that were doing them. And about 3 months later, I received an email that said, you have been accepted to come to Chicago and to meet with the doctor at Northwestern University. So I was like, okay, this is great. This is exciting. And we're going to change the direction of this. And I met with the doctor, did again, a series of MRIs, which they requested up there. There's nothing like sitting in an MRI tube for 4 hours. And that's fun. And because they have their own battery tests, and the doctor came and met with me.
Be claustrophobic, right?
Right, exactly. And the doctor met with me for less than 10 minutes, if that, and said I was not a particular candidate that he was looking for within his trials. He felt as though, because of my age at that point, because I was probably, in my mid-40s, somewhere around there, mid to late 40s, and he was also looking for specific criteria. Again, he was looking for a criteria in a gender, more females in his studies. He was looking for a particular age, and even particular condition of MS. And so I left very discouraged. And
of course, no, totally understandable.
Yeah,
got all your hopes up, made the trip, and
yes,
dismissed after 10 minutes. That must have felt awful.
Yeah, it did. And, as I said, I was pretty crushed, to be very transparent. And it was the next morning, my wife and I just kind of rallied. And in the meantime, during that process, I had already found out that there was other international clinics that were taking patients. And I never thought it in my mind that could be my second option. I just knew of it. The process and the protocols were very similar to what was going on in Chicago. But I wanted to keep it in country. And it was the next day I applied to both Russia, and I also applied to Mexico. And I'll never forget, my wife says, we ain't going to Russia. She might not have said ain't, but she said, we're not going to Russia. So I said, well, we'll see. I was actually accepted into both. Within 48 hours, I was basically put on a waiting list, and we kind of left it at that. And so it was probably a few months later that I was actually at work one evening, and my wife Rebecca had picked me up, and she had gotten an email that said, this was the Mexico location, and we want Clinica Ruiz, and we want you to come and be here by February 1. And this was February 1. 16. And this was on January 4th. I'll never forget the date. And I said, there's no way. I can't do that. I haven't even shared it with my work that I'm looking
Yeah.
and doing this. So there was a lot of things that were going through my mind. So that was that was pretty much what brought me to the process of going to in one of the international clinics of Clinica Ruiz.
And was that sponsored by that clinic in Mexico, or did you have to self-fund part
It was
of it, or
100.
what?
It was 100% self-fund. So that's the
Man.
unfortunate, yes. And I say unfortunate. Unfortunately, it's not approved in the United States. At that time, it wasn't approved in the United States. There was no trials happening in the United States other than the Chicago one, which I was not accepted in.
Yeah.
And, but so yeah, it was 100% funded. And my wife had started a campaign, a fundraising campaign, and along with my daughters. And it was very humbling, to say the least. And sometimes I get emotional thinking about it because there's no way I could have done it by myself. There's no way. I don't even know. I know that would never have happened. But between my wife and my 4 daughters, getting it out there and wanting dad and husband to stop this progression of MS, and they did a fantastic job with it.
Wow, that's heartwarming. So fantastic to hear. I can only imagine how overwhelming that must be to shore up the funds, make sure you can do that, and yeah. So what was the treatment like then?
Treatment.
Walk us through that experience.
I've slept since then. So we were actually, myself, I was one of 2 only United States citizens that went. Everyone else was from United Kingdom. We had some individuals from England and Germany and Norway and such like that. And we became fast friends. We're still friends to this day, which is phenomenal. But the treatment itself I didn't know what to expect. And to be honest with you, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I was terrified of a few things because what the process is, you go through several rounds of very aggressive chemotherapy to break your immune system down, to essentially reboot your immune system. And so I had to go through several rounds of this aggressive chemo, and I was very concerned. I was also concerned about losing my hair. I know that sounds very vain, but I was concerned about that. And how long am I going to lose my hair?
Yeah.
And what other side effects would I potentially have, etc. But the treatment itself I'm not going to ever say it was a cakewalk, it was easy and things like that, because it's not. It is an aggressive treatment. It is an aggressive process.
How long did it take?
So we were there for a total of 28 days. I actually ended up leaving the clinic a couple days early because my neutropenic had ended and my numbers were good, so I could travel. I'll tell you, the clinic, is excellent. I've always said and will continue to say it's the best medical care I've ever had in my life.
Wow. Okay.
Right. Compared to even United States doctors, and this is no slam to doctors here in the United States or anything like that. However, these are doctors and nurses that are with you essentially from 7 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. And they are there at your beck and call, and they're there for whatever they need to be, not only from a physical side, but also from an emotional side. It was wonderful. And so it was very aggressive at certain times. There's certain medications they give to you to push the stem cells that are deep in your bone marrow into your bloodstream, and that increases. There's a tremendous amount of bone pain that goes with that, and that's the filgrastim shots and injections that they provide you. And again, there's a significant amount of bone pain that goes along with that, and then you're of course going through chemotherapy. You also had to get I had to get a port in my neck. So my first doses, if you will, rounds of chemo were through just an IV process. And then they put a port in your neck. I was very concerned about having this port put in my neck. I had to go through a surgery to have that. That was one of my biggest fears of having that, but it ended up being one of the easiest things. But it was a very arduous process, I should say. And even to this day, I look back and 9 years later, and I'm like, it was rough. I talked to another person, a friend of mine, and they said, well, how do you think you did? Was it easy? I'm like, there's nothing easy about it. Maybe the first 2 days are kind of easy, but that's just because you're assessing with doctors and things like that.
What's the success rate of that, statistically speaking? Were you going in and you were almost guaranteed that there would be some sort of transformation after, or can things go wrong? I guess things can always go wrong, but
Right.
what are
That's
sort of the thoughts going into something
You
like
know,
this?
my initial thoughts were because I had seen other people and talked to other people, and there was some videos channeling around, and individuals were, either in a wheelchair and then they were running on a beach and things like that. And come to find out, those were not accurate statements at all or accurate depictions. There was a little bit of cloudiness, there was a lot of bit of cloudiness and that. But my expectation, my first number one expectation was, well, let me back up a second. So one of the assessments you had to have was having to talk to a neurologist there. And he said to me, he says, well, it appears you're transitioning to secondary primary progressive MS. And I was like, what's that? Again, here I am 12 years later of diagnosis. I had never didn't know the different stages or the different levels, if you will, of MS. And my only comment was, and can I still continue? And he said, of course, you most certainly can. He said, however, just keep in mind, the outcomes may be a bit different than what you were expecting. He was very clear in his English and just a great doctor. And so my expectation and my focus was, I want the progression to stop.
Mm-hmm.
That was my number one goal, just to have the progression halted. And so any additional symptom recoveries would be a bonus. So if I could walk better, great. If I could do this better or those types of things, that would be great. And I was pretty satisfied with it afterwards. I did provide, a news, and, I would look back now and I see the video of me walking after this interview, and my walking was still a little rigidity, but it was a little bit more freestanding and things like that. But it was also 2 weeks after my stem cell transplant. Your body's still a little bit weak. It's much weaker after that because you're going through a very rigorous and arduous process. I didn't realize what the recovery was going to really be involved in. It's not something like, you break a finger or even break a bone in your body and it takes 4 to 6 weeks to heal. It takes months.
Yeah. Wow.
And each person's a little different as well.
Yeah. And so till today, is it true that the progression stopped for you, or what? So what's the before and afters? Before the treatment, you were walking with a cane and the impacts on your daily life were getting more severe.
Right.
What was post-treatment life for you?
So post-treatment life was very involved as far as I hadn't returned back to work at that point because I was still in my healing, trying to, eating healthy. I was really focusing on my diet, nutrition, and exercise because, that's all I wanted to do was focus on getting good and better as well as possible and have my, if you will, those blood panel numbers get to where they needed to be because I was still a little bit above neutropenic, but I just didn't know what that was going to involve. Now, fast forward months later, and even years later, my progression is still halted, which is fantastic.
Amazing.
That's evidence of several MRIs that have taken place since 2016. And my walking is essentially the same. It didn't improve. It didn't, radically change and things like that because of the stem cell transplant. There's been some other things that have taken place, unfortunately, with some medication that I was on for a short period of time that did impact my legs, but that's a whole other conversation. But as far as the outcome of the stem cell transplant and did it do what it was supposed to do?
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Can you share a rough order of magnitude what something like that costs? So
sure,
because
it would be
based on your success,
$2016. Well, it would be $2016. Remember correctly, of course, Rebecca, my wife, would have these numbers down to the penny, but
she fundraised it.
Right. Her and the girls did that, but it was somewhere around $54,000 to $56,000, which was just the procedure, the 30-day process of what's involved, which included, it was all done outpatient, I should say. And this also included, it did not include airfare, it did not include travel, it did not include ancillary costs, it did not include any medications that you needed to take home with you. You had to purchase those when you were there, which is, it's just out of pocket.
Yeah, of course.
It's all, of course, not covered by insurance. So even food, on a daily food, those types of things. The protocol of it has changed considerably over the last 9 years. So now they have two locations, and one is in Pueblo, Mexico, and the other was in Monterrey, Mexico. And the protocols, of course, are the same. And, they've got catering meals, they've got, chefs, they've got custom this, they have a rooftop area where the individuals can go and just relax, and the care partners that are there with their patient, they can go up and relax and, fellowship with other individuals and things like that. It's much different than what it was back in 2016, where they had prepared meals that they put in a bucket, and these are prepackaged meals, and all you did was add water, and that was your meal. So it was very high in sodium, nitrates, preservatives, and things like that, but they didn't want you to do any fresh cooking or suggesting anything like that. This was the product that they provided. So yeah, it's a little different nowadays, but those were the costs back then, was probably $54,000 to $56,000, somewhere around there.
Thank you for sharing that. It's probably still not a luxury sort of treatment experience to have to go through that process. So
right, exactly.
Is there not resources in the United States as well? Is it an accepted form of treatment, statistically or clinically trialed? Do you still have to go to other places to get treatment?
There are, from what I've understood, more than from what I understood, there is now currently a program out there. It's called the Beat MS trial. And there's several different universities across the United States that if you can qualify, and there's different groups. So there's different groups. You may be in these controlled groups, that one group is going to be using a particular DMT, and one group is going to go through HSCT. So they're still going through this process of trials and things like that. And it's a little bit of a challenge to get in these clinical trials. And you've got patients who are very anxious to do this, and you've got patients who are like, I want to do this, but when they go into a clinical trial like that through the Beat MS trial, they don't necessarily know if they're going to be getting the DMT regimen or they're going to be going through the HSCT. And so they're still doing that for the several weeks and such like that. And you have folks that are still saying, I don't necessarily want to waste my time with that. I want to go right in and get the treatment done.
Yeah, I get that. That's understandable. Yeah. So one of the things while researching prior to our show was that you mentioned that one of your goals with this treatment was to be able to walk your daughters down the aisle.
Yes.
Mission accomplished?
Yes. So I have 4 beautiful daughters, and at that time, one was actually, she was engaged before me going to the stem cell transplant. And again, I get a little emotional, but that was always and is always one of my goals, to walk each and every one of my daughters down the aisle. I've been able to do that for 3 of the 4. Whether I'm using a cane or not, I'm still upright, and then, I'm taking them down the aisle. And so 3 out of the 4, I've done that, and there might be something happening in the future with my 4th daughter.
How exciting.
Who might be looking at something like that in the next year or so. So we shall see.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you're going to, of course, walk her down the aisle too, if that happens.
That's the goal. That is absolutely the goal.
And so you and your wife, Rebecca, drew a lot of inspiration from your own experience and started creating a community, a support community. Tell us a little bit more about how that started. Of course, the inspiration, I can imagine, was over a dozen of years of having your own experience and almost no support. So share a little bit more about how all of that started and what Modified by MS is and what you guys do.
Sure. So the genesis of it was it's actually been 5 years, and it was about May of 2020. And as we all know, we were going through the pandemic, and because of COVID life, and everyone, as we all know, we were all home and nobody was getting out. Nobody was doing anything. And unfortunately, even support groups had essentially shut down at that time. And I was actually on Facebook, and there was someone who had made a comment on one of the groups I'm part of. It was a private group that I'm on, and said, it'd be great if we could talk with each other. If we could, if some of us could talk. And keep in mind, I'd never been to a support group at all. I recall in my second year of diagnosis, my MS specialist at that time, he said, there's a support group if you'd like to come. It's on Tuesday evenings. It's at 7 p.m. and there's coffee. And I had zero interest in being part of anything like that. So again, fast forward to 2020, this gentleman had made a comment, and I said, well, I have a Zoom account, and I was thinking to myself, I've got a Zoom account. I'll just throw out a Zoom and see if there's any guys that want to get on there. We could talk about experiences and life issues, and a safe space where guys can talk and things like that. And I put it out there in that first Zoom, again, it was 5 years ago this past week, that there was 5 or 6 guys that were on, and we're all there. And I remember starting the Zoom, and I was like, are these guys gonna even talk? I'm a bit of a talker anyway, as you can see, and I'm a bit of an over communicator. That's what happens when you have 4 daughters and a wife. And
I loved it about you.
And I'm like, am I going to get these? Are these guys going to want to talk? I can't get them to be quiet, and which is fantastic. And it was such a wonderful evening that, here these gentlemen got on. There were several of them different parts of the country. And all they kept on saying was, hey, are we doing this again? So it continued to, roll. And so every Monday, that group has evolved. And what started out with 5 or 6 men on that group has grown anywhere from an average attendance is about 40 people that get on the Zoom each Monday. But the numbers have actually gotten as high as 60 to 70, depending on maybe there's a particular topic we're going to be talking about, because there's always a topic to talk about as it relates to MS, and something we can hover around. And I'll bring different specialists on, different Zooms, different presentations if someone wants to get on and talk about something that's in the community of MS. So I've been fortunate enough to bring specialists onto our Zooms so they can talk. And it's just wonderful because these doctors have become such good partners with us, and that they just love doing this. They don't mind doing this. And they will sit there on the Zoom and they'll be there for an hour or two just answering wonderful Q&A. And we have individuals and men that are on these Zooms all across the United States and Canada and even other parts of the world who have jumped on.
Wow, that's crazy. So it started out as a man's only group, right?
Right.
Probably because, so that's me thinking. So there's a 5-to-1 prevalence in women to men. So I suspect there were a lot more women support group, but not as many men support. Is that why you started out men's only, or was there?
So I just started it because I was a guy, and I remember sharing that with my wife, and I said, I'm going to do this, and it just became a bit of a thing that I was doing each Monday and connecting guys. And I've always had this. I'm very good about communicating and talking. I'm definitely not a doctor. I'm not there to give medical advice, but I may know a thing or two as it relates to MS and the journey. At that time it was 15 years or so into the journey, and maybe I could give some insight to other men and how they were feeling and things like that. Because again, this was COVID time.
Yeah.
And everything was shut down, and you couldn't connect with people. And then from there, my wife actually suggested, have you thought about maybe we could do a Zoom for couples and for individuals, for couples who have, MS, whether it's one partner or the other partner. And we actually have a couple, both the man and the woman have MS, which is kind of a unique situation as well. But it's also a great opportunity, again, it's a safe space where we can connect and talk and share our individual journey, individual strategies. And sometimes, like even on the couples group, it's kind of nice. I joke about it. It's kind of like having a double date with 8 or 9 different couples on that Zoom, and we're talking about life, and it's a lot of fun and such like that. And it evolved into having a few other support Zooms. We now have a Women with MS, which is hosted and moderated by one of our moderators, she has had MS for over 20 years. And we also have a newly diagnosed Zoom called Overcomers. There was a niche in the market that there wasn't anything specifically for a Zoom support for individuals to, these are individuals that are been diagnosed for 5 years or under. And so they can get in and, talk about how they're feeling, or how they're accepting, or what's going on, and ask questions and things like that. And so that group has really grown over the last couple years. And we also, of course, have our care partners support, which happens twice a month as well.
Awesome. And so you do all of this through a nonprofit, right? So you
Correct.
guys put together a nonprofit, and you've since, just saw this wasn't there last year. It's you got a program, it's called Made for More. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That was actually my wife's idea. What we encountered, we've been a new nonprofit for a little over a year and a half now. And so my wife and I as we're talking to individuals and group settings and Zooms and things like that, we realized that there was more and more people that were struggling to get a particular piece of equipment, whether it could be a shower chair, it could be a mobility device such as maybe walking crutches, maybe a wheelchair, could be a motorized wheelchair, could be a scooter, and things like that. There's been a big shift in the Medicare system over the last few years as far as how that is, if you will, scrutinized, and how it's questioned, and how the process happens. And it's not as easy as, if you're going to have if you need something, it has to go through, sure, you can pay out of pocket, but if you're going to go through the Medicare process, there's a lot of now checks and balances that have to happen, which is fine. But meanwhile, that person,
you need to help. Yeah.
They need something. So what my wife, she and my other daughter, they came up with this wonderful campaign, and it's an opportunity and it's a nationwide campaign where we offer, if individuals have a particular mobility device that they would like to donate to Modified by MS, depending on where they are in the state and such like that, then we will take it, and then we will give it to someone, and because we have the connections in those nationwide in different areas, and we can get it into the hands of the person who can really use it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And just want to plug a little bit of awareness. How can people donate to your organization? What does that look like? Share a little bit about, so we can spread awareness about all the good work you guys do.
No, I appreciate that. So modifiedbyms.net is our website, and individuals can go to the website and learn more about our organization and the different Zooms that we have. We also have a unique offering. The purpose of Modified by MS is we want to offer those unique resources that people don't necessarily hear about. So one of the other unique resources that we have is actually an annual conference. So
I saw that.
Yes.
That sounds like a fun event.
It is. So most MS conferences, they're specifically focused for the doctors, the clinicians, pharmaceutical companies, and such like that. But there's nothing specifically for the MS warrior or their loved ones. And so I remember, again, Rebecca coming to me, and she said, have you ever thought about doing a conference specifically for everyone, within the community? And I said,
putting together a conference sounds daunting,
right.
Except if you have been in hospitality and have worked stuff like that before, right?
Right. Or if you've been in hospitality business and you're like, I don't want to have anything to do with that, which was pretty much what I said to her. And I said, no. And she says, I'll let you think about that. And I'm like, I know what that means.
We're going to do it.
So, right. And a couple of days, I went back to Rebecca and I said, what are you thinking? And so we talked about it. And so we put together a conference, and it was a huge success. It was in Nashville last year. And
that was the first time last year, correct?
Yes. It was our first conference, and we had attendees that came across from different parts of the country, from the East Coast to the West Coast, several individuals that came from Canada. And it was a 2-day conference, and it was a wonderful opportunity where the biggest plus out of it, the biggest positive out of it was people walked away with a sense of community, that they didn't feel like they were by themselves. We had individuals come to us after the conference had ended and just gave us a big hug with tears in their eyes and said, this changed my life. And it was those types of wonderful adoration feelings that we had. We're like, wow, this was really something. And so people can find more about the conference and more about what we're doing through Modified by MS.
Awesome. And this year's conference, I saw there is already a schedule put together for it. What are the dates and where is it going to happen?
So this year, again, after the conference was over, my wife said, hey, do you want to do this again? And I'm like, sure, I know what this means. And And I said, it was such a wonderful success in Nashville. How do we make the best better? How do we do that? And like I said, it was a 2-day conference, and we're very focused on we want to make it obtainable for individuals to go, not only from a financial level, but also in ease to get there. So we looked at probably 6 or 7 different hotels and properties because it is a small to medium sized conference, because it is a building. It's only our second one. It's actually going to be at Branson, Missouri, at the beautiful Chateau on the Lake, which is a 4-diamond beautiful resort. And
That
it
sounds
has
amazing.
it is. It's a beautiful resort, and it has several different food and beverage restaurants and outlets that are right there on property. So individuals never have to go off property to have a meal and things like that. We had it at the downtown property, which is a Holiday Inn Express. It was great, but it was pretty limited as far as the offerings and such like that. And we wanted to make it the best we could. And so we're really excited that we were able to keep the cost even lower than it was last year and give more offerings, and even the pricing is definitely lower than it was last year. So like I said, how do we make the best better? We were able to achieve that by going from a Holiday Inn Express to a 4-diamond resort. So I think we definitely achieved that.
Well, it's the location, but that
Yeah,
sounds like a fun location to go to. So
it is.
we'll put it in the show notes, of course, for everyone to find out where things are, and so that they can discover that, and hopefully, if it's relevant to them, go see you guys and build community together with you guys.
We'd love to do that. Yeah, I'd love to do that. It has been. We're really excited about the conference this year. It is going to be a 3-day conference, and we're really excited with the packed the agenda is going to be. That's what people, the individuals are not necessarily looking for that portion, but they are looking for the community. And it's a beautiful resort overlooking Table Rock Lake, and individuals can come and make a vacation out of it, get there a little early, enjoy the amenities. It does have a spa right there on site. So if their partner wants to go down and get a massage or manicure, pedicure, whatever, they do in spas and things like that, they can do that, enjoy that. So we want to make it, agreeable and for the entire family.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I know that both of you are pastors, and faith is central to your guys' life and building community. Beyond your faith, what keeps you guys motivated? Because it's so tough to run a company or a nonprofit. What keeps you guys motivated on a daily basis to keep going with what you do?
That's a fantastic question. And Rebecca and I talk about this probably all the time throughout the week. What is motivating us? But it's these types of conversations when we have with someone who is looking for something. It could be looking for support, looking for a Zoom, looking for connection, looking for community. And when we're able to lead them and to navigate them into a particular area, that's what makes the difference. Or if we're able to assist with a particular, help them assisting with a durable medical equipment or home modification and things like that, that means everything. That's really what perks us up and motivates us each and every day. It is a 24/7 type of organization. So the emails, phone calls, texts don't stop just because it's, a Saturday or Sunday. And we do our Zooms in the evening, so it can cross the 4 different timelines for people to get to. But it also motivates us to, again, we have to be motivating ourselves, but we also have to be controlled about, or I should say, going back to our boundaries and making sure that we take some time also. We have gotten so much better over the last year to managing our schedules, and sometimes how important it is sometimes to invest into ourselves because if we don't invest into ourselves and get that dividend, sometimes then it will not pay.
Yeah, totally understandable. You got to take care of yourself,
Right.
or otherwise
Exactly.
you'll run out of fuel to do
Exactly.
what you love to do. So we're coming up against time, but I got 3 rapid fire questions for you.
Sure.
So what is it on a daily basis that you guys do for yourself that fuels your wellness? How do you take care of yourselves?
I am very focused on my health. I have to be. I always say this to whether I'm on a Zoom or meeting someone or even friends. I want to do the best for me because if I'm not taking care of me, I can't be the best husband, father, and poppy. That's what I'm called, poppy. Husband, father, and poppy that I can be. And so that involves an anti-inflammatory diet, exercising on a daily basis, a mindset, motivation, and movement. So I just really have to focus on that. A little bit, maybe OCD about what my routine has to be within those first few hours in the morning because I need to get my exercise in. I need to get all these types of things in before I start my day because if I don't, then my mindset's kind of messed up. There's changes. So there's, of course, I'm adaptable. So, I can move and things like that, but I'm very focused on those things.
What's your favorite MS-friendly meal or snack?
So my favorite meal is salmon. Anything salmon, I will eat it. I love salmon. And my favorite snack is my wife makes these, it's nothing crazy. It's just a protein ball. But I probably eat 6 or 7 protein balls throughout the day because if I have a snack, I actually have 2 sitting right over here on the side. So when I'm done with
It's
this
very
video,
tempting.
yes, I'm going to be eating a couple protein balls and drinking my water. So that is, it's nothing really special. And, but I'm very tempted many times. I'm like, hey, I'd love to get some M's. But I know if I eat those M's, how I'm going to feel 30 minutes afterwards. So I have to be very disciplined, which, again, I am a dad and a husband and a poppy. And sometimes there might be a cupcake on a birthday and then I'm going to enjoy the cupcake.
Yeah, as you should.
Right.
Last question for you. What phrase or mindset has guided you through really hard days?
I think that mindset and that motto has kind of lived into our organization. It's not broken, not defeated, just modified. I do use a scooter for long distances, and I'll have individuals, look at me and they're like, "Oh, you look like a young guy. Why are you using a scooter?" All folks say, "Were you involved in a football injury?" And I don't look like a football player at all. Or were you in the war? Or were you in the military? I get a lot of those types of things. I say I have multiple sclerosis and they're like, "Oh," and like that. And, "Well, you look good. Why you look so good?" And which we hear all the time. But I think it's just important for, that again, mindset, movement, and motivation. Not necessarily in that order, but that is also how I live it. I am very big about, my life now is a little modified than it was even just 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. But I have to, if I don't keep that mindset right, then my movement is going to be off and my motivation is going to be off as well. But again, not broken, not defeated, just modified.
I love that. I don't think you can end on something better than that motto and mantra. Matthew, I want to thank you so much for joining our show.
Of course.
We'll put the resources in that people can access with you guys. And I really appreciate you not only coming onto the show, but doing what you do. It means the world to a lot of folks in our community. I know this, and to many, many that get newly diagnosed and have nowhere to go, nowhere to find help. And, I think the community that you have created is a wonderful thing. So keep
Thank
on
you.
doing what you have been doing, and we'll, of course, be in touch.
Thank you, Hannes. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.